This presentation is about American author Henry David Thoreau, who lived from 1817 to 1862, and the chapter called Economy from his famous book Walden, or Life in the Woods. Who is Henry David Thoreau? Thoreau was born in 1817 in Concord, Massachusetts, the son of an unsuccessful storekeeper and later a pencil maker, and the grandson of a successful merchant who moved from Boston to Concord. Thoreau's father was an amiable and meek man who cherished peace and ease, and his mother was a dynamic and reform-minded woman who dominated the family. She encouraged her children to share her own deep interest in nature and education. Thoreau enrolled at Harvard when he was 16, but he was a nonconformist and rebelled against the college regulations by wearing a green coat when required to wear black. And he said of the parchment diploma he earned, "Let every sheep keep his own skin, I say," showing his disrespect for the institution. And later he replied to Emerson's comment that Harvard covered all the branches of learning with all of the branches but none of the roots. After graduating from Harvard, Thoreau moved back to Concord and worked with his father making and selling pencils, and then ran a private school and became friends with Ralph Waldo Emerson, who introduced him to Transcendentalist doctrine and got him to join the informal Transcendentalist Club that met at Emerson's home. Thoreau lived with the Emerson family for 2 years, paying for room and board working as a handyman, before he moved to Walden Pond on Emerson's tract of land. He spent 2 years and 2 months there, writing and living simply in nature. He wrote his most famous book, Walden, about the time he spent living on Walden Pond. He objected to organized resistance and organized institutions and argued not for a change in governmental institutions, but in individual lives. For example, he opposed slavery but was not an abolitionist. During his lifetime, this eccentric loner was often criticized, being called an arrogant preacher or a pantheistic egotist, and an antic stranger opposed to stability and order. His celebration of nature and call to simplify, as well as his emphasis on the individual's conscience over societal law, have inspired many in recent years. Thoreau's writing. Thoreau only published 2 books in his lifetime, Walden, or Life in the Woods, in 1854, and A Week on the Concord and Merrimack Rivers in 1849, and both were unsuccessful in his lifetime, with only 2,000 copies of Walden sold in the last 8 years of his life, and slightly more than 200 copies of the other books sold. In fact, Thoreau said of their failure, "I have now a library of nearly 900 volumes, over 700 of which I wrote myself." Thoreau also wrote many essays, which were originally designed as lectures, but were eventually published in the Transcendentalist journal, The Dial, for which he worked as editor. Thoreau wrote his most famous essay, Civil Disobedience, after being arrested and imprisoned for 1 night for refusing to pay his poll tax of $1.50 during the time he was staying on Walden Pond. This essay asserts that it is our civil duty to refuse to follow unjust laws, promoting the idea of passive resistance. Thoreau wrote his greatest work, Walden, while living in a small cabin he built on a small tract of land on Walden Pond in Concord, Massachusetts, owned by Ralph Waldo Emerson, his friend and mentor. Originally, he planned to live cheaply and simply there while writing the description of a trip he had taken in 1839 on the Concord and Merrimack Rivers. He remained on Walden Pond for 2 years and 2 months, during which time he wrote his first unsuccessful book and began writing Walden. He revised and then published Walden 5 years after he had moved back into civilization. Thoreau was criticized for his literary contributions during his lifetime, but posthumously his work has increased in popularity and today is more widely read and more influential than that of any other member of the Transcendentalist movement. Thoreau's celebration of nature and call to simplify, as well as his claim that laws are not more important than our moral conscience, remain very popular philosophical principles today. Thoreau's essay, Civil Disobedience, has been influential in modern movements of passive resistance throughout the world. Economy from Walden, or Life in the Woods. Economy is the longest chapter in the memoir and spiritual quest that Thoreau wrote called Walden or Life in the Woods, about his 2-year, 2-month, and 2-day experiment living in a small cabin on a piece of land owned by his friend Ralph Waldo Emerson on Walden Pond in Concord, Massachusetts, which Thoreau built as part of an experiment of living simply in nature away from the pressures and influences of civilization. He felt that people's desire to own things makes them spend too much time working to be able to afford them, resulting in the loss of their inner freedom. He advocated simplifying our lives and identified 4 necessities: food, shelter, clothing, and fuel. He said that if people would limit their possessions to these 4 necessities, they could easily live off the land with minimal toil. Thoreau kept meticulous financial records in this chapter of the book, showing how he was able to live simply for 8 months for only $25. 62 minus 27 he made from the sale of his produce from the garden he raised during his stay at Walden Pond. Themes in Walden are self-reliance, simplicity, and criticism of modern progress. In Walden, Walden Pond becomes a symbol of withdrawal from social obligations and conventions, and the vitality and tranquility of nature, all of which Thoreau advocates. Some famous quotes from Economy from Walden are as follows: "The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. Nature and human life are as various as our several constitutions. Who shall say what prospect life offers to another? Could a greater miracle take place than for us to look through each other's eyes for an instant?" By the words necessary of life, I mean whatever, of all that man obtains by his own exertions, he has been from the first, or from long use has become, so important to human life that few, if any, whether from savageness or poverty or philosophy, or ever attempt to do without it.